What's up, guys? Let's talk trial. I know it's been a long time. It's probably been 4 or 5 months since the last time I put a video up here, or really did anything video related for that matter. But I've just been busy, man. Been since June, probably since June or July of this year till now. I've been in like 5 or 6 different trials, so it's been a hell of a trial season with COVID sort of ending and courts opening back up and all that kind of stuff. Basically, everything's getting tried, and so I haven't really been able to dedicate any time to doing this kind of stuff. But anyway, let's get back in it. Let's talk some trial. We got a pretty interesting trial going on here with the Kyle Rittenhouse case, and I'm here to tell you why you should not watch the opening statements, why you should not watch the closing arguments in this case. The trial hasn't finished yet. Closing arguments are going to be up to 5 hours, apparently, which is kind of insane, but there's really no need to watch them, and I'm going to tell you why. But before we get there, let's do a little bit of a recap of what the evidence has shown so far. It basically was 4 or 5 days of the prosecution, or actually it was probably more than that, of the prosecution just putting on witnesses that showed that what the defendant in the case did was a reasonable use of force. And it's kind of weird to see something like that, especially if you're not involved in the system, if you don't know how this works, if you've never tried any cases like this, and you're just kind of thinking, you have this idea that cases that are prosecuted are always prosecuted for just reasons. And so you see this case, and you're probably wondering, if you actually watch the evidence, you're probably wondering, well, where is the evidence that this was, in fact, a crime that was committed that day by the defendant? And the answer to the question is it's complicated. It's complicated because really this is not a case about what the evidence shows or doesn't show. This is a case about what the jury is going to think about what was done. It seems like the facts are pretty undisputed. It seems that it's pretty undisputed that the defendant was chased, that he turned around at some point, and until he was actually aggressed, he didn't shoot. So those facts are pretty tough for the prosecutor in this case to get over, because basically he's going to have to prove beyond every reasonable doubt that the actions of the defendant were unreasonable, that the force that he used was unreasonable under the circumstances as perceived by the defendant. Meaning, if you're the defendant and you're there that day and you're confronted with those exact circumstances, there is no reasonable doubt that using force at that point, using deadly force, was the wrong move. And so that's a tough thing to prove on these facts. And it shows. Pretty much every single witness that went up there bolstered the defense of this case, which is self-defense. Every single person that testified in one way or another corroborated the fact that when lethal force was used, it was warranted. And so it's kind of a tough spot for the prosecution to be in, but at the same time, this is probably one of those cases that should not have been brought to begin with. The defendant, is charged with multiple counts, probably only one of which is warranted, which is the possession of a firearm by a minor, which is a crime, and there's really no evidence that it was a lawful possession of a firearm by a minor at that time. And so that one crime, which is a misdemeanor, was probably the only thing that should have been brought against the defendant. Instead, they hit him with like 6 counts of stuff, a bunch of counts of murder, endangering, all this other stuff. And it's tough. It's tough to prove that case, and it's perhaps should not have been brought. And it really all starts from the beginning, when the first witness testifies, and we kind of start learning why the defendant was there to begin with. And it all starts from, they were there earlier that day to clean up graffiti, trying to make sure that things were clean and undamaged, and then they go back to try to protect this car shop that had been vandalized at some point, or one of the locations had been burned down, and apparently the owners were really going to suffer if more of the locations were vandalized and burned down. And so they go out there just to protect the property. The defendant has a met kid, so he's trying to provide aid to people. It's this kind of weird situation where you have a kid who apparently thinks that he's going to be able to do some good and that things are going to be okay. He gets kind of puts himself into this mix of violence and chaos, and ultimately ends up killing two people and shooting the third guy, but all within the realm of what's reasonable self-defense. In fact, he actually used a lot more restraint than other people would have used in the circumstances. The guy that he shot, Gage, I can never say his last name, the paramedic that he shot him in his bicep, that guy actually had a gun, and the defendant didn't actually kill that guy. He just shot him once in the arm, and when that guy stopped being a threat, he didn't shoot him anymore, which is an incredible amount of restraint when you're running down the street. You get hit with a skateboard, there's a guy kicking you in the face, and you just shot, basically, two people. And so, I mean, as far as self-defense goes, this is probably as perfect a self-defense case as there can be. The only real kind of, I guess you could say, collateral damage there was the paramedic, but even he was in a spot where he was using his own firearm to point at the defendant. And so, even though he can say he didn't want to hurt the defendant, and he can say he didn't want to shoot the defendant, all that kind of stuff, none of that really matters for a self-defense perspective. You're not required to read anybody's mind. And so from the position the defendant was in, you have a guy in the middle of the night who you don't know, who just run down the street to try to chase you down, pointing a Glock at you. What are you supposed to do, right? You're supposed to read his mind or wait and see what he's going to do? No, you can shoot him. And he shot him. And I think that he's fortunate that he didn't kill him. But if he had killed him, it would not have been a crime. It would have been lawful self-defense. And so, as far as the case goes, I did not see really anything that the prosecution did to even create a doubt as to whether the self-defense or the use of force, rather, was reasonable. And they have to do a lot more than just create doubts. The prosecution has to convince the jury beyond all reasonable doubt that the use of force was not reasonable under all the circumstances. And in this case, that's an impossible task. I think they probably should have not brought this case. It was probably heavily politically motivated, and it's the kind of situation where the only justice that can be done at this point is for the jury to do what the jury will likely do at the end of this trial, which is acquit him of all counts except for the possession of firearm by a minor. Although I do think that, I do think that there is a chance that even the possession of a firearm by a minor he gets acquitted on, because the jury may be thinking, wow, you put this guy through all this stuff that clearly there's no evidence of, and now you want him to come back and convict him of something. So they may nullify on even that count. And ultimately, I think that's what's going to happen. I think when the trial starts back on, the jury's going to be instructed on a whole bunch of lesser included offenses. There is a chance that there's somebody in the jury that feels very strongly that the kid should not have been there to begin with, that was not his place. And so in that case, they may convict him of something lesser, a lesser included offense. But chances of him being convicted of any of these murders are as close to zero as they can be, and rightly so. This is not a case where you have a jury who's, runaway jury if they acquit. This is not a case where somehow if there's an acquittal it means that the country is racist or whatever. This is a case that an acquittal should happen and likely will happen, and that is the just outcome in a case like this. And it's not justice only for this defendant, but it's justice for everybody in those circumstances. Because if you think about it, if this defendant were to be convicted on these facts, then what could ever be lawful self-defense? Like how much of a threat do you have to be under in order to be able to kill somebody in this country, right? If a guy pointing a gun at you is not good enough, if two guys chasing you down and hitting you with a skateboard and kicking you in the face, and a guy trying to take your gun away from you is not good enough, then what is good enough, right? And if you think that under these circumstances this is not lawful self-defense, then you probably are not in favor of self-defense just as a concept, right? You probably don't feel that human beings should be able to kill other human beings under these circumstances, and I think that's fine. That's a matter of opinion. But if we are going to believe in lawful self-defense to the point of being able to use deadly force, then this is the kind of case where the defendant has to be acquitted, because the evidence, it's almost completely uncontested that this was in fact self-defense, and nothing that the prosecution has put on even says otherwise or even suggests otherwise. So ultimately, you don't have to watch the closing argument, and you don't have to watch the closing arguments because you're going to spend there 5 hours of, waste your time for 5 hours to ultimately realize, if you haven't already, that this is self-defense. This always was self-defense. And whether you agree or disagree with why he was there, or the kind of person that he is or isn't, or any of that stuff, it doesn't change the fact that this is self-defense under our laws. And so he's gonna be acquitted, and that's just kind of the end of it. I think ultimately the prosecutor, should have not brought the case, and hopefully he does a lot of thinking about why he brought a case like this, and why, when the people in his office told him he had to work it, why he didn't say, "No, man, I'm not working this case. I'm not trying to prosecute this guy where the evidence is so clear that it was self-defense." In this case, I think it's a good case for the nation to really see how prosecutions in general, not all the time, not most of the time, but there are times where that prosecutor is prosecuting a case that he knows should not be prosecuted. And they go upstairs and they talk to their supervisors, and their supervisors tell them, "Look, I don't care what you think. You go down there and prosecute this case." And they do it. And it's not just, it's not fair, it's not right, it's not what should be, but it's what happens every day in courtrooms across the United States of America. And you're seeing it now because this is a big case, but it happens behind closed doors all the time to defendants who are not, big time, let's say, media type defendants or cases, and nobody really knows about it, nobody cares about it, except for the people who work in that system and see it day in and day out. So this is a good case for people who don't know how this works. Well, now you do, right? Now you've seen it, now you know it, and this is not just one guy who's been prosecuted for political reasons. This is not like, oh my God, this has never happened before, but somehow this kid, this is happening to. No, this is common. It's a lot more common than it should be, and I have seen it myself firsthand. I have worked a case where there was a lot of media pressure, and there was a lot of family pressure, and there was all kinds of pressure, and I had two clients who were prosecuted for something they didn't do. Ultimately, the jury did the right thing and acquitted them of all charges, but they were facing a significant amount of time on a homicide, and it wasn't fair and it wasn't just, but it happened, and it will continue to happen. And hopefully, seeing cases like this in the media, where people who would never really be part of this process get to see what's going on, hopefully that helps us change the system for a better system. We do have some of the best procedures in place in the world. We do have one of the best systems in the world, and the jury system, it's by far the best system of justice I have ever seen, but still, it could be better, it should be better, and we should be working to make it better. But anyway, going back to this trial, there's really no reason why you should watch the closing statements. Don't waste your time. When that verdict comes in, you'll see what ultimately will be an acquittal in this case, and that's not a miscarriage of justice by any means. That's just what should happen based on this evidence, based on these facts, and based on the jury instructions that they will get. So anyway, guys, that's it for now. I hope to catch you again next week. I am pretty much kind of on a lull now from trials. I don't have anything coming up till January of next year, so I have about a month and a half of downtime. So I hope to be back on here and doing some more trial videos and stuff like that. I know there's a couple of big trials happening that I haven't really been able to watch, and so I'm going to check those out. And I guess we'll talk soon. Take it easy, guys.